get into it here. As Mark mentioned, we have an incredible thing coming up next. I am extremely excited. Okay, I might actually be a little terrified, but my body can't tell the difference between excitement and being scared. But, we're just going to roll with it. As Mark mentioned, we are bringing up Jocko Willink. Who's excited to see Jocko? I know I keep asking that, but I'm excited. So, I have the pleasure of sharing. This won't just be a typical keynote speech. He's not going to get up here and just yada yada talk at you. This is going to be in the style of a live podcast with the host of the Dentalpreneur, Dr. Mark Costas. So Mark's going to come up here. They're going to do a little podcast together. And then you will have the opportunity for a live Q&A session. So if you look up here to the left, maybe you're right, there's a microphone, and back in that little gap towards that second door, exit door, there is a microphone back there as well. So as you're listening to Mark and Jocko, as you're getting all of the information, be thinking about questions, because you'll have the opportunity to ask one-on-one as soon as we wrap this up. So we are just going to get into it and learn from the man who taught us all the meaning of extreme ownership. So let's bring our host back out here, the host of the Dentalpreneur podcast, Dr. Mark Costas.
All right, so I'm switching into podcast mode. I'm taking presenter hat off, putting podcast hat on. I work with notes for podcasts to make sure that I'm maintaining some semblance of structure to my talks. Gosh, this next guest, is hard to convey briefly what this gentleman has meant to me. Even though I only met him a couple of weeks ago via Zoom, Jocko has been a mentor of mine since 2015 when I first heard him on the Joe Rogan podcast. Right after that interview, I went out and bought his book, Extreme Ownership. After that, we bought books for every single person in the mastermind group, distributed them very quickly, and that became mandatory reading for everybody in our coaching group, and has been every year since. I've read Extreme Ownership over every single year. It's one of the books that I reread every single year because the lessons change depending where you are in your personal and professional trajectory. This guy is a real-life American hero, and I am just beyond thrilled to welcome him to the stage. So please join me in welcoming Jocko Willink to the stage. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you, man. All right, Jocko, great to have you here, my friend. So we're going to start this off like a regular podcast. We're going to play the intro and all that stuff. We get between, nothing like your numbers, but we get between 8 and 15,000 unique listeners to the podcast every single day. I'm sure it'll be triple that when they hear that you're on here. And we only have about 700 people in the house right now. So there's a lot of people back home that are going to want to hear this. So we're going to do this as a traditional podcast right now. And you are very familiar with the podcast world, so you'll know what to do. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Dentalpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Costas. How y'all doing today? Yes. As you guys can hear, I am not in my normal at-work studio in Prescott, Arizona. I am actually in front of a group of about 700 people at the 11th annual 2024 Dental Success Summit. And sitting right next to me is a legend and a person that I consider a mentor, even though I just met him in person a few minutes ago. A little bit about our guest, who is Jocko Willink. Jocko is a former U.S. Navy SEAL commander on Task Unit Bruiser, which under his leadership became the most highly decorated special operations unit in the Iraqi war. During his time in the military, he was awarded the Bronze and Silver Stars. Following his military service, Jocko became a prolific author with New York Times bestsellers Extreme Ownership, Leadership Strategy and Tactics, Discipline Equals Freedom, a Field Manual, and The Way of the Warrior Kid. He is the host of the wildly popular Jocko podcast And his entrepreneurial ventures include Echelon Front, a premier management and leadership consultancy, as well as Jocko Fuel and Origin USA. Help me in welcoming to the podcast, Jocko Willink. My friend, how are you doing today?
I'm doing outstanding. Thanks for having me out. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is really surreal for me. I'm really, really happy to have you here. I'm going to start off with one of the most powerful stories right in the beginning of extreme ownership. And, authors know that you have to have a hook, and man, you hooked us from the first chapter of extreme ownership when you talked about the situation that you had as the commander of Task Unit Bruiser when you had a blue on blue situation. Maybe you could take us through exactly what happened there, what a blue on blue means, and how you handled the aftermath of that particular unfortunate situation.
Yeah. So I was in charge of 2 SEAL platoons. It was called Task Unit Bruiser. We had done a extenuous workup, preparing to go on deployment, and we deployed into a combat zone that was unlike any combat zone that the SEALs had been in really ever, but the most sustained combat since probably Vietnam. It was a city called Ramadi, is in western Iraq, the capital of Al Anbar province, and it was just a complete war zone. So we showed up there and we immediately started working with the Army and the Marine Corps that were out there trying to win back that city from the insurgents. We ended up conducting a large operation alongside the Army and the Marine Corps and the friendly Iraqi soldiers. And during this operation, it was a big clearance operation, and I had multiple elements of SEALs out in the field. And those SEALs were actually working alongside Iraqi soldiers. So these small elements of SEALs and Iraqi soldiers were dispersed throughout the city. And some of the elements were pushing through and clearing house to house, actually looking for insurgents. Some of the SEALs and Iraqi soldiers were in what we called overwatch positions, setting up and making sure no enemy approached. Well, as this was going on, there was a situation that unfolded where one of the SEAL elements that was in an overwatch position, they couldn't see what they needed to see to protect the guys on the ground. So they moved positions. As they were moving positions, as they got into a new position, there was another group of Iraqi soldiers, friendly Iraqi soldiers, that had moved outside the area where they were supposed to move. And they, by terrible coincidence, happened to try and go into the building that the SEALs and other Iraqi soldiers had already occupied. The SEALs that were in the building thought that it was enemy that were approaching, because at the time the enemy looked very similar to the friendly Iraqi soldiers. They had killed Iraqi soldiers, taken their uniforms. They had taken helmets. We had pictures of enemy fighters in these uniforms. So one of the SEALs saw what they thought was an enemy soldier, an enemy fighter entering their position, and he shot him. Then the Iraqi soldiers that were out of position called for other Iraqi soldiers to come and help. Then you had other Iraqi soldiers, other American soldiers show up, and we ended up having what's called a blue on blue. And what that means is friendly forces fighting against friendly forces. The SEALs that were in the building called for a quick reaction force. I was already in the city. I was a few blocks away. And I immediately said, hey, I want to go. Those are my guys. Take me in. As we got in there to the position, I realized something was wrong. I could tell that there was some confusion. I got out of my vehicle and there was a Marine, and I said, what's going on? And he said, there's enemy in that building right there. And I looked at the building, and I knew from my map that the building where my guys were supposed to be was only across the street and a few buildings down. And I thought to myself immediately, there could be some confusion here. And the Marine looked at me and said, there's enemy in that building right there. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go check it out. And I literally walked over. I think he thought I was a little bit crazy. I had one other SEAL with me. I kicked open the door. And as soon as I kicked open the door, I saw one of my other SEALs there. And I looked at him, I said, what happened? And he said, we got attacked. And I said, I think that was friendly forces. So I walked out of the building, I found the Army company commander, and I looked at him, I said, hey, I think this was a blue on blue. I think this was what we call fratricide. And he looked very confused because it didn't make sense to him. We went back to base. There was several, that operation carried on for 5 or 6 more hours. We finally got out of the field. The battalion commander, I went to see him immediately. So the battalion commander is in charge of all the Army soldiers in that particular district of the city. I went up to his briefing room and he asked what happened. I said, sir, I believe that was a blue on blue. Here's what happened. I laid it out for him on the map. And he said, okay, let's make sure it doesn't happen again. Then we continued operations for the rest of that day. We finally completed that day of operations. And when we got done, now I finally opened up my computer, and I know when you think of combat, you don't think of emails. But I finally now have an opportunity. Now I'm back on this base. I opened up my computer and I have a bunch of emails. Because the worst thing that can happen, in my opinion, in combat is friendly fire incidents. It's the worst thing that can happen. I mean, it's absolutely horrible. There's nothing worse than losing a man because our own forces killed him. And so when my SEAL had shot at what he thought was an enemy, it was actually a friendly Iraqi soldier. It was absolutely terrible. So one of the first emails that I had was from my commanding officer, who was located about 40 miles away. And it said something along the lines of, I'm on my way, stop operations, I want a full debrief, I'm bringing the Master Chief, and I'm bringing an investigating officer. I want to know what happened. So we shut down operations, and now I start putting together a brief to explain to my commanding officer what happened. And as I started doing that, I had the little voice in my head that we all have, which is, who should I blame for this? You know, should I blame the Iraqi soldiers that went a little bit beyond their limit of advance? Should I blame them? Should I blame my SEAL element that had moved without telling me where they were going? Should I blame the radio man in that element that didn't put that information out to me, didn't call me and tell me where they were going before they went in that building? There were so many different people to blame. And as I thought about each one and how I could blame this person and blame that person, I felt a knot in my stomach each time I tried to point my finger in my head at one of these other individuals. And as literally 6 hours went by as I'm preparing this brief, and finally there's probably, my commanding officer had arrived. He was on base and he was headed to receive the debrief, literally 10 minutes away. And I still, in my mind, I can't figure out who should I blame. And then as I'm sitting there looking at the map and thinking about who I should blame for this, the answer became just so blatantly obvious that there was only one person to blame. And I went into the debriefing room and I had my whole task unit sitting there. I had my commanding officer, I had the command master chief, I had the investigating officer sitting there in the front row. And one of my guys had been wounded as well. So in that terrible friendly fire incident, one Iraqi soldier was killed, a couple more Iraqis were injured, and one of my guys was wounded as well. He was fragged in the face. He's sitting in the back of the room. He could have easily been killed. So as I'm sitting there, I get in the front of the room, they're sitting there in front of me, and I said to the group, whose fault was this? And one of the guys raised his hands. You know, the Iraqi soldiers, they shouldn't have gone too far. And I was like, no, it wasn't them. The SEAL that actually took the shot raised his hand and said, this is my fault because I should have positively identified that target before I pulled the trigger. And I said, no, it wasn't your fault. The radio man that hadn't called in early enough, he raised his hand and said, hey boss, this is my fault. I should have told you where we were going. And finally, I looked at everyone in the room and I said, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. There's only one person to blame for what happened out there, and that's me. Because I'm the senior guy. I'm responsible for everything that occurs. This is on me. And these are the protocols that we're going to put in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And that's exactly what we did. We came up with protocols and standard operating procedures to prevent or at least mitigate to the maximum extent possible from this happening again. And that dynamic, that attitude, I could see as my commanding officer, as I said this, I could see my commanding officer was also wondering probably who I was going to blame. The investigating officer was probably wondering who I was going to point my finger at. And the look that they had on their face was a little bit of surprise, but then a nod of confidence that, I mean, when someone on your team does something wrong or makes a mistake and they point their finger at someone else, how does that make you feel? Of course, you say, oh, this person's not taking responsibility. I took responsibility. It is my responsibility. It 100% all does fall on me. And that's what you have to do when things go wrong. Take ownership, figure out how you're going to get the problem solved.
Awesome story. Now, I know that you didn't accept responsibility because you wanted to avoid any type of consequence. But do you think the consequences would have been different had you pointed the finger at somebody else?
I would have to talk to my commanding officer, but my guess is, knowing how I respond to people that make excuses and blame other people, I can imagine he would not have been very happy, which is an interesting point, because we all know that when someone makes excuses and blames other people, our respect for them goes down. We all know that, and yet we all still have that instinct to blame other people and make excuses. So I would have to talk to my commanding officer. I've never specifically asked him that question, but I can only imagine that if I would have gone into that room and said, hey, sir, all this happened because of Fred over here, I would have fired me.
Yeah. Jocko, if you are going to live by this philosophy, can you see a situation where you're taking on too much ownership as a leader? Could you potentially handcuff your direct reports or your team in general if you're taking on all the responsibility and pushing the initiatives yourself too hard? Could you potentially reach a point where they're breaking down or just shutting off mentally or creatively?
There's all kinds of mistakes that you can make when it comes to taking ownership. So, Mark, if you work for me, Mark, and I say, okay, Mark, we have a mission that we're going to do tonight, and I'm your boss, and I say, here's the mission. Here's the people I want you to take with you. Here's the weapons I want you to bring. Here's the route I want you to take to the target building. Here's how I want you to enter the target building. Here's the route I want you to take to get back here. Here's what time I want you in the debriefing room. Now take ownership of that plan and go execute. Right? Yeah. Is that your plan? No, I've taken so much ownership that I am not giving any ownership to you. And so that's terrible. Mm-hmm. So if you make that kind of mistake, that's one mistake that you can make by taking too much ownership. The other way you can make a mistake of taking too much ownership is taking ownership doesn't mean doing everything yourselves. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, the fourth law of combat leadership that I talk about in all my books is decentralized command, letting your subordinate leaders lead. And you absolutely have to do that. You have to let your subordinate leaders step up and make things happen. Otherwise, you become a micromanager. Mm-hmm. And when you're a micromanager, now you're down in the weeds trying to control every little tiny aspect of a situation. When you do that, who's looking up and out? Who's seeing where we're going next? Who's looking at where the market is turning? The answer is nobody. So you can't overwhelm yourself by trying to do everything yourself. That's not what extreme ownership is. Extreme ownership is taking responsible for the outcome. It doesn't mean you actually personally do every little task that's in front of you. That's impossible. So those are two situations where if you try and take too much ownership, you can absolutely get overwhelmed, or you can take away the initiative of your subordinates.
Awesome. So you talk about this term leadership capital. Leadership capital is an interesting concept to me, almost as if you have a certain amount of finite capital that you can expend with your teams. So it's important that you have the ability to know which battles to fight and when to extend a little bit of flexibility. You have a really cool story about the patches in your book. Can you expand on the whole idea of leadership capital? When do you think it is time to kind of dig your heels in and when you should extend a little bit of flexibility?
Yeah. So you actually said that you have a finite amount of leadership capital. Mm-hmm. And I get what you're saying, but that's not quite accurate because you can actually build leadership capital.
Okay.
You can actually grow leadership capital. You can increase your leadership capital. You can, just like your bank account, you can do things and earn more money for your bank account. You can also expend more money. And it's the same thing with leadership capital. And what's interesting about this is everything that you do as a human being interacting with another person has an impact on your leadership capital. So when I think about leadership capital, what it really is it's in many ways, it's a measurement of the strength of a relationship that you have with other people. And I talk about relationships all the time. Mm-hmm. Because that's what a team is. A team is people with relationships. If you don't have any relationships, it's just a group of random people. But when you have relationships, now you have a team. So as I've been talking about relationships for the past 10 years, a couple years ago, as I was telling someone to build relationships, how's your relationship? Check on your relationship, build your relationship. And the person had a little bit of a blank stare on their face. And I said, do you know what a relationship is? And they couldn't really give me a solid answer. And so I started thinking about it. What is a relationship? What is it? And I ended up with 5 components that I believe represents a relationship. Trust, listen, respect, influence, and care. So if you and I don't trust each other, do we have a relationship?
No.
Of course not. Of course not. If you don't listen to me and I don't listen to you, do we have a relationship?
No.
If you don't respect me and I don't respect you, do we have a relationship? If I have no influence over you and you have no influence over me, do we have a relationship? Mm-hmm. And if I don't care about you and you don't care about me, do I have a relationship?
No.
Of course not. So, obviously the opposing is, if you trust me and I trust you, do we have a relationship? Yeah. If you listen to me, I listen to you, yes. If you have influence over me and I have influence over you, is that yes. If you care about me. So, that's what a relationship is. And really, those things are how we get leadership capital. So if I want to build a relationship with you and I want to build my leadership capital with you, I have to build trust. I have to make sure that we listen. I have to make sure that we have influence over each other. I have to make sure that we treat each other with respect, and I have to make sure that we care about each other. Okay, great. The question is, how do we actually do that? If I want you to listen to me, how do I do that? How do I get you to listen to me? And this is another component where someone asked me a question. It was like, my team doesn't listen to me. What should I do? How do you get someone to listen to you? The answer's pretty obvious. All you have to do is talk louder and get closer to their ears. Does that work? Does that work? When someone raises their voice at you, do you listen more or do you listen less? Of course, you listen less. So if you want someone to listen to you, what do you have to do? Listen to them. Listen to them. If you want someone to trust you, what do you have to do? You have to show them that you trust them. If I want you to respect me, what do I have to do? Say, you better respect me. I've been doing this for a long time. Does that work? No. I have to treat you with respect. If I want to have influence over you, what do I have to do? I actually have to allow myself to be influenced by you. That will open up your mind. And obviously, if I want you to care about me, I have to show that you care, that I care about you. So in order to get these things from people, you have to give them to people. And that is essentially how you build leadership capital. So if you and I are working together and you come into the office and you say, hey, Jocko, I want to talk to you about this marketing. And I go, not right now. You want to tell me about a marketing? Hey, I don't want to hear it. What does that do to my leadership capital? Goes down all day long. If I want to build leadership capital, I've got to listen to what you have to say. If I want to build leadership capital, I've got to put trust in you. When you come and say, hey, Jocko, I've got this new marketing plan I want to try. What do you think? And I go, I don't like what your plan is. Does that show trust? It doesn't show trust. But if I say, hey, you know what? I'm not really sure. I don't know too much about that type of marketing, but why don't you take a little budget and see where it goes? What does that show? Trust. Now you're going to trust me more. By the way, when I did that, I allowed you to influence my whole plan over here because you do this new marketing program.
You have to be willing to do that.
Exactly. So now, as we do this trust, listen, respect, influence, and care, what's the biggest obstacle in giving those things away? The biggest obstacle in giving those things away is my own ego. Because why should I listen to Mark? I've been doing this for a long time. Why should I listen to him? Why should I allow him to influence me? I'm the one that's the CEO of the company. Why should I have to put trust in him? He needs to trust me. I'm the boss. You see where this is? This is all ego talk. It's all ego talk. So put your ego in check. Listen to what other people have to say. And that's how you build leadership capital. Now, are there times where you have to withdraw? Yep, there are. There are times where, hey, listen, I did a bad job last quarter, and I know I told you I was going to give you some more marketing dollars for this program you wanted to run. We can't do it. We can't do it. I just don't have the money right now. That cost me a little bit of leadership capital. Guess what? Luckily, I have a big bank account. Now, one of the mistakes that people make is they walk around, and they make this mistake with regular finances too, right? They walk around as if they got a fat bank account, and they don't. And they use leadership capital credit cards. And they end up in debt. And then when they do need something, they're already in the hole and they can't cover the cost. And so we end up losing people because we had no leadership capital.
Yeah, makes sense. So we are in a very interesting job market. And since the pandemic, we've found that it's very difficult to find skilled workers or even people that are willing to work. What do you do if you have somebody that's good at their job, they're filling a role, but they fail to embrace the whole concept and philosophy of extreme ownership to the point where they could be potentially starting to degrade the culture or the morale of the entire organism?
When someone is failing to embrace the idea of extreme ownership, what does that look like in your business?
Well, it wasn't my fault. It was hygiene department's fault because they were slow and we ran 15 minutes behind every patient for the whole day. By the end of the day, we were 3 hours behind. It's their fault.
Okay.
And me as a scheduler, there's nothing I can do about it.
Okay. I'll tell you what, let's go sit down with the hygiene department and see what we need to do with them so that they can make up that 15 minutes. Make sure that they understand where you're coming from and you understand where they're coming from, and let's see if we can come to some kind of a resolution. So what I do right there, they're making an excuse and they're blaming someone else. I'm actually gonna listen to them. I'm gonna listen to them. Oh, okay. I didn't know that you had that issue with the hygiene department. Let's go talk to them and let's go figure out what we can solve. So I just removed one excuse off the table. And so this person is a habitual blamer, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. Or victim.
Yeah, habitual blamer, habitual victim. Now, after we've sat down with the hygiene department and they've made some adjustments and they say they're going to do this thing, they're going to add this protocol in to save that time, what's their next excuse going to be?
Well, I mean, it obviously is the back office fault because their transitions are too slow and they don't break down the room fast enough. So that's another reason why it's not my fault. It's now hygiene's fault and it's back office fault.
Okay, let's go talk to the back office. You can see where I'm going with this. Let's go talk to the back office and see what we can do to get that turnover to be quicker. Mm-hmm. All right, let's go sit down and talk with them. Maybe we're not scheduling enough time. Maybe they need an extra 5 minutes. Let's go figure that out. Eventually, there aren't any more excuses to make.
Right.
And by the way, none of these questions that I'm asking are accusatory. I'm not saying, oh, you think it's a hygiene? Okay, let's go talk to hygiene. It's not their fault, it's your fault. No, I'm not doing that. I have an open mind. I literally want to find out what the problem is. Is there a possibility that this person is right Sure, there's a possibility that they're right. I want to go find that out. Could the back office be a little bit faster? Could hygiene move a little bit quicker? Yeah, well, maybe. Or maybe they can't. And if they can't, then what do we need to do with the schedule to make it work? So one thing we have to watch out for. Let me give you an example. If you mess something up and I go, hey, Mark, you need to take ownership of that. What's that? What is it? Is that if Mark works for me and he's falling behind at the end of every day, and I walk in and go, Mark, you're falling behind every day, you're not finishing all your appointments, that's ridiculous. You need to take ownership of that. What does that look like? What is it?
Blame.
I'm just blaming him. I actually want to talk to him and figure out why he's falling behind. Maybe I didn't give him the right training. Maybe I didn't explain how important it was for him to get his job on time. Maybe the hygiene team doesn't understand that if it takes them an extra 7 minutes or 4 minutes, by the end of the day, we're missing an appointment. Maybe they don't know that. Maybe I haven't done a good job of explaining that. Mm-hmm. So it's my fault. The other thing we have to watch out for is trying to impose extreme ownership on everybody. Like, you need to take ownership, you need to take ownership, you need to take... Nothing tastes good when it's forced down your throat, right? Like, what's your favorite food to eat? What's your favorite dessert?
I don't eat that much dessert. Let's see, that's a tough one, Jocko.
What's your favorite food then?
I eat salmon and brown rice.
Okay.
8 times a day.
Check those mercury levels. All right. So if I force-fed you salmon and brown rice, forced it into your, how good would it taste? Wouldn't taste good at all.
Right.
No one likes anything that's forced down their throat. No one likes things that are imposed upon them. So if we have the attitude that we're going to go in and impose and force this concept on people, they're going to be standoff and they're very often going to reject it. Instead, what we want to do is we want to set that example. And the best way to set that example is say, oh, sorry, Mark, I didn't know that the hygiene was backing you up. Mm-hmm. Let's go talk to them and figure out what we can do to streamline this process. And when they see you take ownership, what do? They start to take ownership as well. And this is the attitude that starts to spread throughout the organization. Now, does it spread to everyone in the organization? No, it doesn't. You will find a small percentage of people that are going to, no matter what, blame everyone else. Mm-hmm. And can they start to cause problems inside the organization? Yeah. And do you occasionally have to counsel them and escalate that counseling to a point where you get rid of them? Yep, it can happen. Is it better to have one terrible person that's doing a little bit of work, or have 4 other people doing a little bit of extra work and get rid of that terrible person? Yes, I would much rather do that. But most of the time, people's attitude as we build relationships with them, as they understand this concept, as they see this concept in action, they transform. And I can say that because I've seen that over and over and over again. I see it in the military and I see it with normal civilian companies all the time.
Got it. In dichotomy of leadership, you talked about this story where you had a certain method of evidence collection, which was basically ransacking a house, throwing everything on the floor, turning everything upside down, and then trying to get data and information from that particular location. And you tasked somebody to come up with a better system, and you came up with a better system of information collection. And when you proposed that to the troops, you got a bunch of pushback, particularly from some of the more senior SEALs that you were leading. How do you overcome that type of resistance when you're trying to enact something that you know will be to the betterment of the organization and will cause an improvement after a little bit of work?
You just said the key component. When we try and make a change inside the organization, setting the right expectations is absolutely critical. And the expectation that you should set isn't that my new process is going to make everything better. The expectation you should set is I want to try a new process. Out of the gate, I think we're going to be less efficient. Out of the gate, I think we're going to be less efficient as everybody learns how to do this. Over time, I think we have an opportunity to improve efficiency, but I think we can only do that if we put in a little bit of work to try it, and then we figure out how to hone this new process, because I know I'm not perfect, and I know I missed some things, but if I could get help from you on the team, I think we can do this in a better way, save time, save money, make everyone's lives easier. So oftentimes, when we're in a leadership position, we present ideas as if they're the best ideas in the world and everything's going to get better immediately. Mm-hmm. Very, very seldom does that happen. Yeah. So if you present and set the expectation that this is going to take a little bit of work, I'm open-minded, by the way. I want feedback from you. I want to know how this works. I want to know what to change. Can you help me? That's what I've found to be the best method for trying to implement change. Trying to dictate change from the top and trying to impose a new procedure or a new process on the team when they didn't get a chance to give any input, it's usually very challenging. What's even better is, it's kind of what I did in that situation. I didn't say, hey, here's how we're going to do it. I gave someone on the team the opportunity to develop a plan. Mm-hmm. That was one less person I needed to worry about trying to convince that this new plan, him and the two guys that helped him come up with this plan, they were bought in. And then we just presented it to the rest of the team with that same open-ended attitude of, hey, this isn't going to be perfect. We'll make some changes. We'll adjust. And then with some rehearsals, it was not just a little bit more efficient, it was infinitely more efficient and more effective.
Amazing. Equanimity is a big word that we throw around our coaching group. It was my word for 2023. I've heard you say many times that you thrive in chaotic environments when a lot of stuff is happening around you at one time. That is not the case for a lot of people, particularly people that are business owners for the very first time or have medium to largish teams. Chaos is a sign for shutdown and not being able to deal with things or maybe lashing out or dealing with something in a negative manner. What are some tips that you have for being more poised under a lot of pressure and high stress situations?
Yeah, this is, I have a term for this. I call it detachment. Of when there's mayhem going on, when there's chaos going on, you have to be able to take a step from that chaos, back from that chaos, back from that mayhem, back from your own emotions, and be calm, look at the situation, figure out how to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. There's a few things that happened in my SEAL career that taught me how to do this. One of them was when there's chaos going on, and this was what I learned as a young SEAL in the 90s. There's no war going on. This was training, just training operations. Mm-hmm. When there's chaos going on and you get on your radio to ask for help or give direction, if you sound like you're panicking, if I come up on the radio and say, everybody needs to get on building 34 now. First of all, it causes everyone else to escalate their emotions. Mm-hmm. And second of all, more importantly in the SEAL teams, if you act like that on the radio, everyone's going to make fun of you when the operation is over. So what I learned to do was, if I was going to say something on the radio, before I keyed my handset, I would take a breath. Hey, this is Jocko. We need to get everyone in building 34 now. Boom. Now, as I took that breath, and I found this out later, that is a way you can force yourself physiologically to calm down. Another thing that I did, again, the first time I did it was through kind of luck. I was doing a training operation, and we were on a big oil platform out in the ocean, and we were doing a clearance, just training. This is just training, but we're training to clear this big oil platform. And we end up in this situation where everyone in my SEAL platoon is looking down the sights of the weapon, and they're staring down the sights of the weapon, scanning for targets. And we're all in a big line, and no one's making any decisions. No one's telling us what to do. And by the way, this was in my first SEAL platoon. I was the youngest guy. I was the most junior guy. And I'm standing there looking down at my weapon, and I'm waiting for someone to tell me what to do. And no one's doing anything. And 5 seconds go by, and 10 seconds go by, and finally 20 seconds go by, and I get curious, for lack of a better word. I get curious. So I come off my weapon, I point my weapon at the sky, and I take a step back. And I look to my left and I look to my right. And when I look to my left and I look to my right, I see that everyone in my platoon is doing this. They're all staring down their weapon, which means they can't see anything. Because when you're looking down your weapon, your field of view is tiny. And even though I'm a new guy, I look around and I can see clearly what we need to do. It's a real simple tactical call. Hold left, clear right. And I just said, hold left, clear right. And I kind of expected someone to smack me in the head because I was a new guy. But instead, the platoon just passed the word. Hold left, clear right, hold left, clear right. And that's what we did. And I kind of wondered when we got done with that, how come my platoon chief didn't do that? How come my platoon commander didn't do that? How come some of these more senior guys? And it's because they were focused on what was right in front of them. And so from that moment on, whenever things were starting to get chaotic, I would take a step back and look around. Take a step back and look around. And what I also learned, this is a physiological reaction that people have. When you get very focused visually on something, it intensifies your emotions. When you take a step back and you look around, this is why when you go to the ocean and you watch the sunset, you get a sense of calm. It's a big, giant horizon. There's no caveman threat of like saber-toothed tiger right there. That amps you up. When you go to the mountains and you sit back and you look at the mountains, a huge field of view, it's relaxing. Well, when there's intensity going on in your business, in your life, take a step back, look around, open up your field of view, and it calms you down. So those are some methods that I figured out in order to stay calm when things get intense. Now, what is even more critical than those two is the first part, which is trying to figure out the indicators that you have as an individual human being that indicate, oh, I'm starting to lose my temper. Oh, I'm starting to get emotional. Oh, I'm starting to feel like I can't control anything. And I don't know, everyone's a little bit different. Sometimes people, I'm sure you've seen people get red in the face, right? You see people that happens to. You see them start to sweat. Maybe you see their fist clench. Maybe their breathing starts to go. We all have these things. This happens to all of us. We have to realize when that's happening. We need to see those indicators. Maybe it's when I start talking a little bit loud. Take a step back. Detach. Look around. That is a protocol that you can have. Take a breath, protocols that you can put in place so that when things are getting heated, when there's a lot of emotion, you don't engage in that emotion. You're not going to make any good decisions if you get angry, if you get emotional. Even if you get too happy, right? You get super happy. That's what drunk people are, right? They're super happy. They spend a bunch of money in Vegas. That's what they do. They bring people, make them drunk, so they gamble a bunch of money away. It's bad decisions. So having extreme emotions, either extreme positive emotions or extreme negative emotions, both those can cause problems. What do we need to learn how to do? Recognize that we're getting emotional, take a step back, take a breath, look around, and let's engage with logic and thought rather than with emotions.
Excellent. Excellent. So Jocko, you lost a fair number of your close friends, your brothers in arms, while you were under deployment and during your military career. How has that changed the way you look at life and just general business since, you've lost, a good number? And by the way, you've done an incredible job of honoring them in your works over and over again.
Life is absolutely precious. And it's fleeting. And those friends and brothers that I lost taught me that with a level of detail and power that it impacts me every day. It's very easy to lose sight of that. You know, I was listening to you backstage. It's very easy to get focused on the bank account. It's very easy to get focused on the car. It's very easy to get focused on this goal or that goal. And forget that none of that stuff is going to matter. None of that stuff is going to matter. And if you make those things your focus, I kind of chuckled backstage when you said you finally got $1,030,000 in your bank account. And you said, I was miserable. And I laughed. I was like, oh, yeah, that's not going to help you. That's not that. Look, is it nice to have $1,030,000 in your bank account? Sure. But you are unhealthy, out of shape, unfulfilled. Terrible, terrible situation. Going into combat and seeing the sacrifice, I got to learn that lesson. You know, you had to work hard and get yourself into a scenario where you looked yourself in the mirror and said, this isn't going to make me happy. There's other things in life that are more precious than money. And those guys taught me that.
Amazing.
They taught me that life is going to be short. It's going to be short. And you got to do things that mean something. And for me, the most gratification comes from helping other people. And that's where I think human beings feel the most gratification, is seeing someone that you were able to help out get over a tough situation, get through something that was hard, get better at what they're doing. That's what I think we should be trying to do. And those guys taught me that.
Amazing. So now that you've spent a good portion of your adult life in military service, you transitioned out and you almost immediately started to try to translate your leadership skills and the lessons that you learned as a military human into being a civilian human. Do you find it difficult to find a sense of purpose in an entrepreneurial venture? I mean, you're a prolific author now, which I can see a lot of purpose getting derived from that. But how about some of the other entrepreneurial ventures? If you're looking at, your ultimate goal to become more profitable and to employ more people, do you find that kind of a difficult to motivate and find purpose in versus your military service?
So, no. And here's why. Let's say, so I have a clothing company.
Mm-hmm.
A clothing company, if what I wanted to do was maximize profits, what I would do is go to China and buy a bunch of clothing from China, have clothing made in China, continue to ruin the environment by manufacturing clothing in China, continue to abuse kids by putting them to work in sweatshops by manufacturing in China. And guess what? My profits would be extremely high. But I'm not doing that. I have factories here in America. We buy materials 100% American grown cotton, 100% American-made materials. We cut and sew all of our stuff 100% here in America. We got 400 plus people that have jobs here in America, rebuilding and growing the manufacturing capabilities that we are supposed to have in this country. So I just talked about helping people. When we have whole communities that are now able to have jobs, pay their rent, pay their mortgage, have a future, that's what we're doing, is helping people out. And it's only growing. So for me, if you have a goal that is purely maximizing profit, I would be careful, because I don't think you're going to end up in a good spot. If you have a goal that is to help other people, you're going to end up in a good spot. You'll end up in a good spot, because in your business, if your goal is to maximize profit on every patient that comes in, and charge them as much as you can and give them the worst possible service and get them in and out as quickly as possible, what's ultimately going to happen in your business? You're going to have a bunch of bad Yelp reviews. You're going to lose clients, lose customers, and you're going to not make money. Mm-hmm. But if you put the customer first and foremost, and you say, oh, okay, let's take care of them. Let's go the extra mile. What do? They refer someone else, and then your business grows. Can you go too far with that? Well, yeah. You can be losing money. You can say, oh, well, we didn't charge them for this and we didn't charge them for that, and now we're upside down. Okay, now can you help people? No, you can't help them anymore because you went out of business. So look, hey, I make jeans, make blue jeans. They cost $99. That's expensive for a pair of jeans. I know it. That's what it costs to manufacture. It costs more to manufacture here. What if I sold? Well, I really want to help people, so I'll sell my jeans for $28. We're out of business in 3 months. Now who am I helping? All those workers lost it. So there's definitely a balance there, but those things are not opposing. It's not an opposing idea to help people and make money. Those aren't opposing ideas. Those are very mutually supporting, because if you want to help someone as a dentist, you want to have the best equipment in there. If you want to have the best equipment in there, that equipment costs money. So you got to charge people money to go in so you can buy the best equipment so you can take care of more people. Those ideas are not opposing to each other. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with, you were obviously overly focused to make your $1,030,000. Does that mean you should have, volunteered to go work at a soup kitchen and have no money? No, that's too far in the other direction. There's a good balance that you can find where, yeah, you're making money, but yeah, you're helping people. Yeah, you're staying in shape. Yeah, you're taking care of your family. By the way, taking care of your family financially, great. But if we get so focused on taking care of our family financially that we're not home anymore, we might end up without not having a family anymore. If we end up so focused on our family that we're not taking care of our business, guess what? Now we can't support our family financially. So what do we have to do? That's the dichotomy of leadership, right? These are the things that we as leaders have to balance. Do you want to make money? Yes. Do you want to gouge people? No. Do you want to spend time with your family? Yes. Do you want to spend so much time with your family that you sacrifice your business? No. We as leaders have to find balance, and those are just some of the real obvious examples.
That's great. Hard left turn. We got to talk about jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is, there's a lot of people out here that are very interested in MMA and jiu-jitsu, and it's actually a pretty strong thread through our mastermind group. But do you find jiu-jitsu as something that has helped with your creativity, as an outlet? How has it helped you? And how do you think that the average person could get involved with something like this that they're passionate about, and direct their energy towards it without taking away from their current lifestyle?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of jiu-jitsu. I've been training jiu-jitsu for a long time. I've garnered so much from jiu-jitsu. At the top of that heap of things that I've taken from jiu-jitsu is humility. Because I was, 21 years old when I did jiu-jitsu for the first time. I was fresh out of SEAL training. I was lean, mean fighting machine. And this old SEAL Master Chief, this old lanky guy, comes in and said, "Who here wants to learn how to fight?" And I thought to myself, I'm going to teach you something, old man. And about 4 or 5 of us raised our hands and said, "Sure, we'll try. We'll learn how to fight." And he brings us to a place. They have some jiu-jitsu mats. There's actually a judo place. We went to a judo place. And this old man that was older than me, weaker than me, tied me up into knots, choked me, arm locked me. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, what is going on? Whatever just happened, I need to learn it. But that never stops. There's still going to be times where you're going to do everything, use every strength you have, try everything you can to overcome an obstacle, and you're still going to get beat. That's jiu-jitsu, that's life. You have to be humble in jiu-jitsu, and you have to be humble in life. The minute that you are not humble, the minute you think you got everything figured out, what happens is you close your mind. Mm-hmm. You close your mind. And in jiu-jitsu, in business, in life, you have to keep your mind open. If your mind is not open, you're not progressing. You're not learning anything. And you're just going to be stationary. And while you're stationary, by the way, it's not just being stationary because the rest of the world is moving forward. The rest of the world is learning. The rest of the world is evolving, and you'll get left behind. So staying humble and keeping an open mind, to me, are the critical top of the pyramid of the things that jiu-jitsu taught me. And what else could you do to find those things? I really think if you go into any endeavor that you're not familiar with, you can learn those things. Jiu-jitsu is, in my opinion, sort of the best of those. But if you went and start playing chess, you're going to get humbled. If you go and start playing pickleball, because I know everyone's starting to play pickleball right now. If you go start playing pickleball, you're not going to be good at it first. And you've got to go in there and get humbled and train, and then you can get better. that's another piece that you learn from jiu-jitsu, is that sometimes we feel like we should be naturally good at something. Mm-hmm. Oh, I was a SEAL. I was in good shape. I should naturally be able to beat this guy up. You can't. You can't. It takes practice. It takes effort. It takes rehearsals. It takes an open mind, and you need someone to teach you. Like you could, if you lived for 1,000 years, you might be able to figure out the basics of jiu-jitsu as a human. You might be able, if you lived for 1,000 years, if you and I were put on this earth and it was just you and me, and we had to learn how to fight each other, it would probably take us 1,000 years to figure out what jiu-jitsu is and how it works. Meanwhile, and we would only figure out the basics. Meanwhile, you can go down to a jiu-jitsu school today, and you can learn everything that would have taken us 1,000 years to figure out. You can learn it in 3 weeks. And it's the same thing with anything in life. If you want to learn chess, you got to have somebody teach you how to play it. If you want to get better at business, having someone that can say, hey, you know what? I've already made that mistake. Hey, here's how you should actually make this happen. Opening your mind and humbling yourself to recognize that there's things that you don't know naturally and that you need to learn from other people. Probably that humility and that open mind is the key lesson I believe I brought from jiu-jitsu.
You train with some of the legends in the sport, Dean Lister being one of them, absolute legend. Do you find it helpful to always train with people that are slightly better than you? And do you find any value training with people that are not quite as good as you?
The correct answer is the best case scenario is you train with people that are better than you train with people that are the same as you, and you train with people that are worse than you. When you're training with someone that's better than you, you're going to get good at defense, and you're going to pick up some things. Mm-hmm. When you're training with someone that's the same as you now get to apply those skills in a contested environment, which takes practice and takes repetition. And then finally, training with people that you're better than, now you can practice those moves in a way that you can actually execute them with a limited amount of resistance. So it's good to do all three, in my opinion. And that's what most people would agree as well. I can tell you that I said that's the correct answer. Me personally, I like training with people that are better than me. That's what I like. I like getting beat up. I like going, man, this is rough.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Jocko, I can't thank you enough. This is going to conclude the formal part of the interview. We're going to open this up to any questions that you have. We have a microphone in the back there, and we have a microphone up here for anybody that wishes to ask Jocko a question directly. We're going to open that up to the audience now. So come on and hop on up. Don't be shy. We got somebody way back there. Hey. That's Dr. Summer Casno. How you doing, Summer?
Hi. Is this on? No? Should I yell at Jocko?
Can we turn on that mic?
How about now? How about now? Yep.
Oh, there you go. You're hot.
Awesome. Well, first off, thank you very much. That was super enlightening. I'm excited to continue the theme of so much of what you've discussed today. But one thing that I was thinking about, as you were in combat, you were having to consistently probably raise up new leaders. And things I've thought about sometimes are, sometimes the characteristics of what is not helpful as a leader, such as impatience, being selfish, lack of empathy. Often those things are really blatant. We can see those and not necessarily move that person into a leadership position. But what have you found to be some of the more insidious, quiet characteristics that tend to sabotage leaders? Have you found that there's ones that they're not so obvious, but they're really detrimental, things that we could look out for?
Clearly from the conversation that we just had, I'm talking about how being able to mitigate your ego and subordinate your ego and be humble and have an open mind. Those things can be difficult to identify. When someone has a big ego, it can be hard to see. Because sometimes people that have giant egos, they're pretty good at acting like they don't. And I think that can become very difficult. But that is certainly what I'm trying to watch out for. If someone has a big ego and someone's not listening and has a closed mind, they're not going to improve. They really aren't. They're not going to improve. And if they're not going to improve, I'm going to do my best not to invest a bunch of effort into them because they're not going to improve. When the last few years that I was in the SEAL teams, I ran the advanced SEAL training, which meant I got the SEAL platoons ready to go on to deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan at the time. And this advanced training, you're doing a lot of simulated combat. And sometimes the leaders would get fired. And I would be the person that would be recommending that the leader get fired. And when I would recommend those leaders to get fired, it was not because the leader didn't know how to shoot his weapon. It was not because the leader didn't know how to read his map. It was because the leaders lacked humility, because every other issue or problem that they had, if they were humble, they could correct it. They could, if they weren't good at coming up with simple plans, I could talk to them about it. And they say, yeah, you're right, that was too complicated. If they weren't that good at understanding how to maneuver elements in a battlefield, I could talk them through and they say, yeah, okay, I understand, that makes sense now. If they kept putting themselves into the situation where they were the one that was shooting all the bullets instead of the one that's stepping back and directing things, I could talk to them about that. And they'd say, okay, I get it. But when someone had a closed mind because they were arrogant or because they had a big ego, when I'd say, hey, you got a little too engaged in that firefight, they'd say, yeah, but that's where I needed to be. Or when I'd say, hey, you really should have maneuvered that element where they could have provided better support. Well, I don't think we needed the support. And this is where you end up with someone that's not going to improve and they're not going to change. So really, for me, there's one red flag. One red flag. And that is someone with a big ego. So probably a follow-on question is, okay, if I've got someone with a big ego, how can I help them? Well, what you do is you say, hey, Mark, you got a big ego. You better tighten it up. What does that cause? If Mark's already got a big ego, what does he do? He bows up and lashes back at me. What are you talking about, big ego? Of course I got a big ego. Look at how well I've been doing my whole life. You should be listening to me, right? So instead, what I'm going to do is maybe I'll give Mark some kind of a task or some kind of a project that's a little bit above his capability. Something that's a little bit outside his range. And I'm going to let life teach him about humility. Now, of course, I'm not going to give him some task that's going to bankrupt the company, but I'll give him a project or something where he's either going to have to fail or more than likely, hopefully, he comes to me and say, you know what, Jocko, I need some help with this. I don't have this kind of experience. Can you help me? And all of a sudden, we've taught him some humility. And by the way, that also works if Mark lacks confidence. I'm going to give him something I know he's capable of doing. Hey, Mark, here's a project. Well, I'm not sure I can handle this. Well, go ahead and take a crack at it. And he does it. Confidence gets built. So everything that we do in life and in business, everything is a training opportunity. Everything that we do, every day that we have at work is an opportunity for you to train leaders and get people ready and let them prepare and let them improve and let them see their faults and let them get humbled and let them get confident. That's what we're doing as leaders all the time, is we're constantly training. It doesn't often feel like training. It doesn't look like what we think training looks like, but that's exactly what it is. Did you get good at driving a car from the driver's ed course that you took? Of course not. You got good at driving a car by driving a car. And if you anyone from New England in here? Okay, we got some New Englanders in here. You put a person in New England out in a snowstorm, they're fine. If there's a 1/4 inch of rain in Southern California, people are crashing into each other. You learn how to drive in rough conditions by being in rough conditions. You learn how to lead not by sitting in a class, but by doing the thing. And we as leaders can constantly put do you take someone that's 16 years old that just got their license up in Maine and say there's, 4 inches of snow with some ice underneath it, go for a drive? No, that's not what I'm talking about. They'll also crash. But you put people in situations that you know they can handle. Oh, there's rain. Oh yeah, let's go to the Walmart parking lot when it rains. And you can do some donuts and you can see what that car feels like. You can do that with leaders. Hey, Mark, you're going to talk to Fred? Yeah, Fred's got a bad temper, right? Yeah, I know. And you're the one that's going to tell him you're going to cut his hours. Yeah, I know. Let's do a little role play, Mark. I'll be Fred, and I'm going to, how are you going to tell him? We do that little, that's a Walmart. We're just going in there, in the parking lot of Walmart, doing some donuts. He's going to learn how to deal with Fred, who's got a bad temper. So these are some of the things that we need to look for and some of the ways that we can train around the way people are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good one. Monica?
Hi, Jocko. I'm a super big fan. I love all your books. Extreme Ownership was probably one of my favorite books on Mark's reading list that I read. It was great. It really changed me and my practice, honestly. So thank you so much for that. You clearly explained to lead and manage people that are already on our teams, but my question is more about recruitment. The Navy SEALs have some of the strictest protocols mentally and physically. What are you looking for when you're bringing people in for interviews and screening them? Are you making Joni from HR hold the plank for a minute? What are the traits and characteristics you're really kind of looking for?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The SEALs forever, as you know, the basic SEAL training has a massive attrition rate. It's like 80% of the people quit. And for years and years and years, they tried to figure out how can we predict who's going to make it and who's not going to make it. And they didn't figure anything out, really. The only thing they figured out is if you put a person in the situation that's the same as the situation they're going to go through and they make it through, they're probably going to do okay. So how does this translate into the business world? Well, I always encourage people, hey, if you can bring someone on as a contractor, as a 1099 for a month or 2 months to figure out how they perform in that role, that's a great way to do it. Unfortunately, that's not always possible. So what I do at my companies is we are going to give them, gotten the name now Jocko test. We're gonna give people Jocko tests, which is we're gonna put that person in a situation that's similar to what they're gonna be in the actual environment. So for instance, at Echelon Front, I have a leadership consulting company. We have people traveling all over the world all the time. We got to a point where we needed to bring in a professional travel manager. When we did that, part of the screening process was, hey, here's one of our instructors, Carlos. He's got this trip, this event, this trip, this event, this trip, this event. This one's in Ohio, this one's in Florida, and this one is in Venezuela. And then they've got to be back by this date for a recording session. Figure out their travel schedule. As soon as we asked people to do that, that got rid of like 70% of the candidates. Then we had 30%. It was really easy to see who would put actual effort into it. And then we got to the final 2 or 3 who actually did a great job and thought about things that we hadn't even thought of. So putting someone into the actual environment, if they're going to interact with customers, well, let's do some role playing in the interview. And by the way, let's do the role play with the customer that's not exactly happy. How do they handle that? What's their performance like? What can we do to someone? You know, there's another thing I talk about. I don't like to talk about it a lot, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. So in the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, in the end of the movie, it's the best interview ever. When the boy, Charlie, comes into Willy Wonka's office to claim the prize. And Willy Wonka, instead of giving him the prize, what does he do? Does anyone remember? He yells at him, "You get nothing!" And it's a test. It's a test to see how Charlie responds. And Charlie responds by returning the item that he had stolen and leaving. And that was the test. So, do I recommend that extreme example? No. But if you've got someone showing up to interview and you walk in and you say, "Hey, can you wait another 15 minutes? Talk to them rude. What's their response? Like, you can do things like that to measure what someone's going to, how they're going to perform, how they're going to behave. We're looking for humility. We're looking for them to be able to think on their feet. We're looking for them to be able to stay calm. And you can figure out a lot about people through those types of methodologies. Please don't go screaming at your recruits.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you, Monica.
Jocko, after reading your books and hearing about your encounters in Ramadi and bullets whizzing by your head, saying thank you to a veteran means a whole lot more to me. Thank you. I could never fathom the fear that I would feel being in that situation. What I do know is what it feels like as an entrepreneur to double down and to go into the storm and to be scared to push into the next hurdle to bring our organization to another level. Have you ever felt a fear in your entrepreneurial journey that was on the same level as a fear that you felt in the battlefield? And what tools have you given yourself to say good and go into the storm?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, no. I have not felt the fear in the entrepreneurial world that I felt on the battlefield. And the reason I know this is because it's very specific. There's my stomach, I would feel my stomach knotting up. And the fear was being afraid that one of my guys was gonna get wounded or killed. I quite frankly, very rarely thought about myself getting wounded or killed. I had accepted that could happen and I was good with it. But the fear that I had of one of my guys getting wounded and killed was a specific, gut-wrenching, horrible, deep feeling. And I have not felt that in the civilian sector. That being said, again, going to some protocols here for me and what I used to talk to my guys about was there are things on the battlefield that can happen and there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing you can do about it. You can be patrolling down the street, doing everything perfect as a SEAL operator and get blown up by a roadside bomb. You can do everything perfect as a SEAL operator, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a mortar shell drops from the sky, lands next to you, and kills you. You can do everything perfect as a SEAL operator, and with no warning whatsoever, get shot by an enemy sniper and killed. These things can happen. Now, on the battlefield, I did not actually think about those things. Why didn't I think about those things? Because what could I do about it? What could I do about it? Nothing. Couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't do anything about a random enemy mortar landing next to me. I couldn't do anything about a random sniper, unseen, shooting me. Couldn't do anything about an undetectable roadside bomb blowing up next to me. Couldn't do anything. Those things were a possibility. Now, let me tell you what I did have control over. Did we plan to use the routes that had been cleared from IEDs over the last few days? Yes, we absolutely did. Did we maneuver from cover to cover out on the battlefield to mitigate as much as possible a sniper hitting us? Did we try to stay close to overhead cover as often as we could so that mortars would not be a danger or mitigate the danger? Yes, we did. Did we use tactics that mitigated all three of those things? Yes, we did. Did we train? Did we prepare? Did we have our med kits with us? Was our medical guys well trained? Did we communicate with the conventional forces and gather intelligence from them so we could mitigate as much of this risk as we could? That we could. Yes. So even though there were some things we couldn't control out on the battlefield, there was infinitely more things that we could control. And that's what I focused on. I focused on our training. I focused on our rehearsals. I focused on our planning. I focused on our preparation. That's what I focused on. The fact that a random mortar could get me, can't let it bother me. So, in the entrepreneurial world, in the business world, are there things that are beyond your control? Oh, Jocko's sitting up here saying take ownership of everything. How much control did I have over a global pandemic where what I do for a living in one of my businesses, go and talk to people face to face? And in March 17th of 2020, we canceled, I think it was 37 engagements that my company had. Millions of dollars worth of revenue was gone in 2 days. How much control did I have over that? None. I didn't have any control over that. Can't help that. You know what I can control? How we responded to it. How are we going to respond to this? Well, we could say, well, no more talking to people. I guess we'll shut down. Did we do that? No. What we did was we set up Skype calls because Zoom wasn't popular yet. We set up Skype calls with all the clients that canceled to start to talk to them and let them see that we could actually do video teleconferencing to communicate using a computer, and it would actually be very effective and very efficient. And fast forward 3 months, and now we were doing almost the same. Actually, we were probably doing more engagements virtually than we ever did live. We maneuvered. I have a company that makes jiu-jitsu uniforms. In March of 2020, every jiu-jitsu school in the country shut down. How do you sell jiu-jitsu uniforms when no one's doing jiu-jitsu? So what do? Do we say, oh, well, I guess we shut down? No. Oddly enough, there was a demand for people to put pieces of cloth over their face. not just dentists. We started making those. We saw the opportunity on a Friday. We went into production on Monday. We sold millions of cloth face masks, millions of them. So, do I sit around right now today and worry about an unknown, unseen event that could happen, that could impact one of my businesses? Nope, I'm not worried about those things. What I focus on is what we control. Guess what? At Echelon Front, we have a bunch of great instructors. We have a great mentality. We know that we can adapt. We have good decentralized command. We can make things happen. At Origin USA, we have the ability to design, manufacture right here in this country. We can do whatever we want. We have the ability to adapt. That's what I focus on. So, as entrepreneurs, should we sit around and be afraid of these cataclysmic things that are completely beyond our control? No. Should we focus on what we can control? Yes. Should we learn to identify the difference between those two? Yes, we should. Yes, we should. There's some people that are like, oh, looks like the economy's slowing down. Should we be like, oh, I can't worry about that? Should you pay attention to it? If the economy's slowing down, is it the best time to double, triple down on some part of your business that's going to require a bunch of capital investment? No, maybe not. Maybe you take some iterative steps in that direction. So we allow what's happening to influence the calculus of our decision-making process, but we don't let it dictate. So that's what I do with fear. I focus on the things that I can control, that I can impact, and I'm not worried about things that are beyond my control because it doesn't matter anyways.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Okay, guys, unfortunately, we have 5 minutes left, so this may be the last question. I know you guys are patiently waiting to ask your questions. Addison, Colleen.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So you earlier talked about the blue on blue horrible incident there, and that you instituted a bunch of SOPs. Now, in the dichotomy of leadership, you talk about finding that balance. What do you see when you institute systems? How do you look at the team to know whether you're too far on one side of being like too strict or the other side of being too lax in your systems?
The thing that I worry about when I'm putting systems and standard operating procedures in place is that people don't think anymore. They stop thinking. So I want to make sure that I give people enough adaptability that if something that they didn't expect happens, they have enough flexibility to still maneuver and understand what an exception to the standard operating procedure is. So when you go into the DMV and you wait in one line for an hour and 20 minutes, and you get to the front of the line, and the woman says, you're in the wrong line, that we don't process that here, go to that line. Right? They have a standard operating procedure, and she's sticking to it. That's a problem. You know, what she should say is, oh, you're in the wrong line, sir. Don't worry. Come over here with me. Let me take you to the right line. This person will take care of you. So I want to make sure that I'm not creating the DMV. How do I do that? I'm going to check the efficiency of things that are happening. One of the things that I recommend to everybody is check out your own process. I talk about at a manufacturing plant, take that item, that widget that you're going to manufacture, go and do each one of those jobs on the manufacturing line so you understand it. If you put a standard operating procedure in place, go for yourself and go through that procedure. Not as the person owning the procedure, but as a person that's getting owned by the procedure. And figure out, oh yeah, this does work pretty efficiently. Or, oh, there's some things we can adjust. By the way, also, throw some curveballs into the standard operating procedure. Standard operating procedures should be wide enough that if a curveball gets thrown at it, it can still make adjustments and absorb it. So taking and pressure testing your standard operating procedures is what I recommend doing. That's what we did. It also pressure tests the people that are running the standard operating procedure. Some people, look, everyone's different. Some people, you tell them to follow this procedure, guess what they're going to do? Follow that procedure. Some people, you tell them to follow the procedure, guess what they're going to do? Why? and everyone in between. So we need to make sure that those standard operating procedures make sense. They're strong enough to keep people in line, but loose enough to permit some adjustments when needed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right. So Jocko, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. You've inspired all of us today. You've inspired us for years, even though you didn't know you were mentor to many. You are mentor to many people in this room. So I can't thank you enough. Let's hear it all one more time for Jocko Willink. Thank you. I love it.
Thank you.